In the dark hours before dawn on August 7th, 1942, the still waters around the Solomon Islands were broken by the movement of landing craft as United States Marines prepared to step into history. They carried with them the familiar weapons of the era: rifles, automatic rifles, submachine guns and sidearms, yet within their ranks some men gripped a tool not often thought of as a soldier's weapon. It was the Winchester Model 12, a pump-action shotgun born from hunting fields back in America, but now pressed into service as one of the deadliest instruments of close combat the war would ever see. The Japanese defenders who waited on Guadalcanal had trained for rifle battles, bayonet charges, and the clash of steel in desperate hand-to-hand combat, believing their ferocity and spirit gave them advantage. They had no anticipation of the havoc that a repeating shotgun could unleash at close range, no doctrine to counter its spread of buckshot, no protection against its raw volume of fire. Each shell loaded 9 large pellets, and a Marine firing rapidly could saturate the jungle with dozens of lethal projectiles in only seconds, far surpassing anything a man with a bolt-action rifle could hope to achieve. The shock of this weapon was not new to the world. In the First World War, Germany had sought to have American shotguns outlawed, filing protests that they caused unnecessary suffering. Berlin even threatened execution for any American captured carrying one. Washington dismissed the complaint and promised reprisals in kind if any such punishment were carried out. None ever were, and the shotgun remained, its reputation already dark and controversial. By the outbreak of the Second Great Conflict, the Model 12 trench variant had been refined for the battlefield with a shortened barrel, protective heat shield, bayonet fitting, and most importantly the capacity to slam fire, meaning a Marine could simply hold the trigger and pump as fast as his strength allowed, sending shell after shell in a devastating sequence that resembled automatic fire. Against Japanese forces whose tactics relied on infiltration under night cover, on sudden close assaults and massed bayonet charges, this was a nightmare weapon. Only 2 weeks after the Marines landed, the weapon received its first brutal test in the Battle of the Tenaru River. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki led nearly 1,000 men across a sandbar at night, hoping to smash through the Marine perimeter in one overwhelming attack. It was exactly the kind of close combat the Japanese doctrine prized. But waiting in the shadows were Americans with rifles, machine guns, artillery, and among them, men armed with the Model 12. When the attackers surged forward, shotgun blasts at 20 yards tore through entire ranks. Marines who used the slam-fire method turned their guns into thunderous cannons. By dawn, hundreds of Japanese soldiers lay dead, the sandbar a grim testament to the futility of their tactics against such firepower. Survivors told of the chilling sound of a pump cycling in the darkness, a mechanical warning followed by a blast that could end a man's life instantly. From that battle onward, the shotgun earned a reputation not just for killing power, but for psychological terror. In the black silence of night patrols, Marines placed their trust in the Model 12. The point man carried it, ready to unleash devastating force at the first hint of ambush. In defensive lines, men waited with shotguns cocked, listening for movement in the grass or the faint crawl of an infiltrator. A single shot would shatter the attempt, shredding the attacker and leaving no doubt about the futility of creeping closer. Its versatility extended beyond those sudden encounters. Marines learned to use it as a tool of suppression, firing into jungle growth to tear through foliage and strike hidden enemies, or blasting into cave mouths where ricocheting pellets created storms of death inside. In such confined spaces, the sound and fury alone could drive opponents out, even when not immediately lethal. The Guadalcanal campaign dragged on through 1942, and each week proved the shotgun's value anew. On jungle trails in New Georgia, Marines gave point men Model 12 specifically to break ambushes, a single blast often enough to scatter attackers before they could strike. At night, overlapping fields of fire with shotgun-armed men turned infiltration into suicide missions. When the war reached islands like Tarawa, Saipan, and later Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where the Japanese had transformed landscapes into fortresses of coral and concrete, the shotgun was adapted yet again. Marines crawling into caves or approaching bunkers relied on its spread to clear the darkness. A blast down a tunnel might skip off the walls, ricocheting into corners, a storm of pellets that made hiding futile. Veterans recalled the horrifying sound of shot echoing inside stone chambers, making it seem as if death came from every direction. In July 1944 on Saipan, thousands of Japanese soldiers launched a massive banzai charge, the largest of the war. While artillery and machine guns inflicted enormous casualties, In the chaos of men breaking through lines, Marines with shotguns held ground where others faltered. Clouds of lead at close range stopped the desperate tide, turning moments of near breakthrough into stalemate and retreat. By the time of Iwo Jima, the Model 12 had become part of the infamous blowtorch and corkscrew method, paired with flamethrowers and demolition charges. Flamethrowers burned and blinded, explosives collapsed tunnels, and the shotgun delivered the finishing blow, bouncing shot off walls to strike enemies who thought themselves safe in the dark. Despite its fearsome effectiveness, the Model 12 was never mass-issued. Only around 60,000 were produced during the war, dwarfed by the millions of rifles distributed. They were allocated to units most in need: Marines in rifle companies, Army assault squads, Navy landing parties, and even Air Force security details defending forward airstrips. Ammunition, however, was abundant, with shells made in countless variations, from buckshot to solid slugs for longer range, to lighter shot used for vegetation clearing. Marines who carried the weapons swore by it. Some men preferred their rifles, but many testified that in close fighting there was no substitute. The confidence it gave them, especially at night, was unmatched. They knew that if the enemy came close, they held the ultimate equalizer. The Japanese sought counters but found none. Makeshift armour of wood or bamboo was attempted, but it was heavy, awkward, and ineffective. Their only hope was to avoid coming close at all, yet their entire tactical doctrine was built on exactly that. The presence of the shotgun undermined the very foundation of their strategy. The story of the Model 12 is not only the story of a weapon, but of adaptation. The Marines did not cling to tradition. They learned in the field, adjusted tactics, experimented, and passed along what worked. Skip shooting down tunnels, mixing loads of shot and slugs, assigning shotguns to lead patrol positions, none of these ideas were born from manuals. They were created in the jungles and caves where survival demanded innovation. By the close of the Pacific War, the shotgun's reputation was carved into legend. It was not the primary weapon of the American soldier, but in the brutal environments of night combat, dense vegetation, and fortified caves, it was irreplaceable. The Winchester Model 12 turned American adaptability into a tangible, terrifying advantage, proving that overwhelming firepower at close quarters could break the enemy's will as surely as it broke their ranks. Its echo carried beyond 1945 into the conflicts of Korea and Vietnam, where once again it served in jungles and tunnels, a grim reminder of its effectiveness. For the men who faced it across the Pacific, the shotgun represented not just death, but the collapse of their assumptions about combat itself. As the war pressed into 1943 and 1944, the presence of the shotgun on Pacific battlefields became more deliberate and systematic. Commanders had seen its effect in the first months of Guadalcanal and began assigning it specifically to men whose duties demanded brutal close-range firepower. Patrol leaders, scouts, and point men were given the Model 12, their job to absorb the initial shock of contact and answer with overwhelming violence before the enemy could fully act. In the tangled undergrowth of New Georgia and Bougainville, where every trail was a potential ambush and every stand of trees a hiding place, the weapon was considered indispensable. Veterans later remembered that carrying a shotgun was like carrying insurance. When silence broke into sudden gunfire, the ability to throw a cloud of buckshot across the path of an enemy patrol often meant the difference between survival and annihilation. The Japanese were quick to adapt in many areas of the war, constructing elaborate defences, making ingenious use of terrain, and showing tenacity that stunned even seasoned Marines. Yet in the matter of facing the shotgun, no adaptation sufficed. Their close assault tactics that had worked in China and the Philippines turned suicidal when met with the sheer density of projectiles fired from a few determined Americans pumping their Model 12s. The cultural emphasis on the bayonet charge, glorified as the ultimate test of spirit, became not just outdated but catastrophic when soldiers fell in heaps before even reaching striking distance. It was not simply a tactical defeat, it was a moral blow, a weapon that seemed to mock their faith in the superiority of spirit over steel. On jungle nights in 1943, Marines developed routines that incorporated the shotgun as an integral part of perimeter defense. Foxholes and positions were organized with overlapping arcs of shotgun fire. Infiltrators creeping through the grass with grenades were vaporized in sudden bursts. Survivors of these failed attempts described not just the killing power, but the terrifying atmosphere created by the weapon. The sound of pumps cycling, the flashes in the dark, The screams of comrades shredded by unseen blasts all combined to sap morale. In some places, entire infiltration attempts ended after a single volley from a handful of Marines, the psychological shock enough to halt what had once been a vaunted tactic. As the island campaigns moved north, new challenges demanded further innovation. At Tarawa, in late 1943, Marines encountered defences of coral and concrete unlike anything seen before. Japanese soldiers tunnelled deep into the ground, built pillboxes and fortified every ridge. Rifles and machine guns inflicted heavy losses, but it was the combination of weapons that carried the day. The shotgun found a new role here, one born of necessity: cave and bunker fighting. A Marine could not always throw grenades safely into narrow openings, nor could rifles reach enemies hidden behind stone turns and chambers. But a shotgun blast fired into an entrance filled the darkness with ricocheting pellets. Men who thought themselves shielded around corners discovered that the very walls betrayed them, sending buckshot whistling into their hiding places. By 1944, on Saipan and Tinian, this technique had evolved into a doctrine. Shotgun-armed Marines were paired with flamethrowers and demolition teams in what became known as blowtorch and corkscrew tactics. The flamethrower seared oxygen and filled caves with smoke, the explosives collapsed passages, and the shotgun delivered immediate killing power in the chaos. One Marine recalled that when he fired into a dark opening, the blast not only tore through unseen figures but made a sound so horrific inside the stone that even if it did not kill, it convinced the enemy that the cave itself was collapsing around them. Many abandoned strongholds not because they had been physically destroyed, but because they could not bear the terror created by the combination of fire, smoke, and ricocheting buckshot. On Saipan in July 1944 came one of the largest and most desperate Japanese attacks of the entire war. Thousands of soldiers charged American lines in a massive banzai assault, the ground shaking with their cries and the weight of their advance. Machine guns cut swathes through the attackers, artillery tore gaps in the mass, but when parts of the line wavered under sheer momentum, it was men with shotguns who stood in the breaches. At distances of only a few steps, Marines fired blast after blast into the surging tide, clouds of buckshot ripping through multiple men at once. In accounts from that night, veterans said the shotgun fire turned moments of chaos into order, halting groups that had managed to push close. Without those handfuls of Marines and their Model 12s, the line might have buckled. Instead, when dawn rose over Saipan, the ground was covered in thousands of Japanese dead, their last great charge shattered. Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the twin horrors of 1945, brought the shotgun to its most terrible stage. On Iwo, Japanese forces had tunnelled an entire island into a fortress of rock with interconnected chambers, hidden artillery, and countless firing points. Conventional weapons struggled to clear these labyrinths. Marines, advancing inch by inch, turned to combinations of flamethrowers, satchel charges, and the shotgun. The term skip shooting became common, deliberately firing buckshot at angles to bounce pellets into passages and corners. Some Marines described the method as shooting around bends, hitting men they could not even see. In the chaos of smoke-filled tunnels, these blasts often ricocheted unpredictably, killing defenders but also creating a cacophony so unnerving that even hardened soldiers abandoned their posts. On Okinawa, where defenders again fought from caves and hillsides, the weapon earned the same fearful reputation. Marines and army units alike deployed it as a standard part of their assaults. Soldiers who had never carried one before quickly came to rely on its ability to make an uncertain corner or a suspicious thicket suddenly safe. Officers recorded that units armed with even a small number of shotguns had higher survivability rates in jungle patrols, the first shot advantage decisive in determining which side walked away. Despite its proven record, the Model 12 remained limited in number. The 61,000 produced during the war were scattered across many units, often appearing as a handful of weapons within a company. Yet their influence was outsized. Men who carried them often became focal points of patrols or assaults, the entire squad relying on their short-range devastation. Ammunition supply never failed. Shells were produced in vast numbers and in multiple types. Standard buckshot was most common, but Marines also used solid slugs for longer shots, birdshot for clearing brush, and improvised loads when needed. Each shell was a small package of versatility, and those who carried them learned quickly to tailor loads to their expected tasks. For the Marines who swore by the Model 12, the weapon became part of their identity. Some said it gave them confidence on night patrols, where fear otherwise gnawed at every nerve. Others valued its simplicity, knowing it could not jam easily, that as long as they pumped and fired, it would deliver. Veterans later remembered that while rifles felt like weapons of discipline and order, the shotgun was a weapon of survival, raw and immediate. It spoke not of parade ground, but of the desperate darkness of a cave or jungle path. For Japanese soldiers, no counter ever emerged. They experimented with armour, with shields, with strategies of avoiding direct contact, but each attempt collapsed. Their doctrine insisted upon closing with the enemy, but the shotgun made such attempts suicidal. In some ways, the weapon forced them to confront not only a tactical disadvantage, but the collapse of their martial ideals. The belief that spirit and courage alone could overcome Western weapons died each time a squad was erased in a single thunderous blast. The story of the shotgun in the Pacific was therefore not only about steel and powder, but about adaptation. American forces had always shown a willingness to experiment, to discard tradition when survival demanded change. The use of the shotgun was the purest example. No general staff had written it into manuals before the war. No great planner had envisioned its role in tunnel fighting or night infiltration defense. It was the Marines themselves, fighting mile by mile, who discovered its uses, shared the knowledge, and shaped it into doctrine. The Model 12 was a symbol of the pragmatic side of American warfare, of the readiness to use whatever worked, no matter how unconventional. By the final year of the Pacific Campaign, the reputation of the shotgun had already spread across every branch of American forces. Marines on the front lines considered it indispensable. Army assault troops asked for it whenever they faced dense jungle or fortified caves, and Navy and Air Force units kept them close for defense of ships, bases, and airfields. The relatively small number of Model 12s produced meant that it never became the standard weapon of the infantry, but in the niches where it was employed, it performed with an effectiveness that bordered on irreplaceable. The Winchester design had proven durable, simple, and terrifying, a combination of qualities that made it survive the harshest conditions of the islands. As Okinawa ground on in 1945, the weapon once again demonstrated its worth. Soldiers and Marines tasked with clearing the endless ridges and cave networks depended on the same brutal techniques perfected at Iwo Jima: flamethrowers to sear, explosives to collapse, and shotguns to finish. The pattern repeated itself until the island was finally secured at staggering cost. Those who survived carried with them the certainty that the Model 12 had saved lives by halting infiltrations, breaking ambushes, and delivering instant force at moments when hesitation meant death. The war in the Pacific was brutal in ways that tested men to their limits, but in the midst of that brutality, the shotgun became a weapon that gave Americans an edge in the very environments where the Japanese had expected to dominate. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the story of the shotgun did not end. In Korea, once again soldiers and Marines fought at night, in cold hills and valleys where infiltration was a constant threat. Shotguns returned to service, their short-range spread proving as valuable in the frozen dark as it had in the humid jungles. In Vietnam, decades later, the weapon was rediscovered yet again, issued to point men in thick vegetation where every step could mean sudden contact. In the tunnels of the Viet Cong, Americans echoed the cave fighting of World War II, firing blasts that ricocheted through narrow chambers. In each case, the same qualities that had made the Model 12 feared in the Pacific returned to relevance, adaptability, and devastating short-range power. The influence of the shotgun extended beyond the weapon itself. The philosophy of overwhelming close-range firepower shaped thinking in the design of later weapons. Heavy automatic aircraft guns, the withering barrages of the AC-130 gunship, and even the design logic of weapons like the A-10 Warthog carried the same spirit: deliver so much destructive power in a short span of time that the enemy is shocked and broken before response is possible. Though separated by technology, the lineage from the Model 12's wall of buckshot to the devastating hail of a modern gunship was clear. The idea that firepower at the decisive range ends battles quickly and decisively. For the Japanese soldiers who had faced it on Guadalcanal, on Saipan, on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the memory of the shotgun was one of horror. They had been taught that Americans could not withstand close combat, that their spirit and courage would collapse under the pressure of bayonet and sword. Instead, they had found themselves shredded by bursts of buckshot in the night, driven from caves by ricocheting pellets that seemed to come from all directions, broken by a weapon they had not prepared for. Their manuals had never considered it, their tactics had no answer, their faith in spiritual superiority offered no shield. The Model 12 was not just a tool of war but a living contradiction of their expectations. For the Americans who carried it, the shotgun came to symbolize more than just survival. It represented adaptability, a willingness to use anything that worked, a refusal to cling to tradition when reality demanded change. In that sense, it embodied the broader American approach to the Pacific War, pragmatic, experimental, and ruthless in its application of whatever advantage could be found. A hunting gun turned into a weapon of war, a simple pump action transformed into a tool of psychological terror. The Model 12 told the story of soldiers and Marines who would not be bound by convention. In those places it was more than enough. When veterans recalled their service, many spoke with pride of their rifles or heavy weapons, but those who carried the shotgun spoke with something more, a fierce loyalty to a weapon that had kept them alive in the worst of circumstances. The Winchester Model 12's legacy lasted well beyond the fortresses of coral and volcanic rock where it first made its name. In each subsequent conflict from Korea to Vietnam and beyond, it returned when conditions demanded a weapon that could dominate the closest and most terrifying ranges. Its design influenced military shotguns to come, and its philosophy endured in the belief that sometimes raw, overwhelming power delivered at the right moment decides battles more than any other factor. The war in the Pacific proved it, and every Marine who pumped the action in the dark and heard the mechanical char chunk before unleashing devastation knew it to be true. From the black beaches of Guadalcanal to the ridges of Okinawa, the story of the shotgun is inseparable from the story of American survival and adaptation in the Pacific. It was never the most common weapon, never the symbol of the whole war, but in the places where men fought at arm's length in the shadows, it was the weapon that shattered Japanese tactics, broke their morale, and stood as proof that innovation and firepower together could overcome even the fiercest warrior spirit. The Winchester Model 12, a tool of hunters, became a legend of soldiers, its echo carried forward not only in history books, but in the very philosophy of how Americans would fight wars in the decades to follow.